The spinning wheel sang its ancient song in the lamplight. But Willow Green's fingers had forgotten how to make music. 3 days since they'd carried Archer Navarro back from Shiloh Creek. What remained of him bundled in blood-stained wool. His legs lost somewhere in the Tennessee mud alongside 2,000 other boys who'd never see home again. 3 days since Dr. Zane Keller had emerged from the makeshift surgery room, his sleeves crimson to the elbows, shaking his head at questions no one dared voice aloud. And for 3 days, Willow had sat beside Archer's bed, her spinning wheel, positioned just so, close enough to catch his fevered mumblings, far enough that the rhythmic whir wouldn't disturb his fitful sleep. The other women in Millbrook whispered it was unseemly, a young unmarried lady keeping vigil like a wife. But Willow had stopped caring about propriety the moment she'd seen them carry him through her father's front door. You can almost smell the carbolic acid and laudanum that clung to everything in the Green household now, transformed overnight from a modest boarding house into a field hospital. Phoebe Dalton, the preacher's daughter, had offered to help with the nursing, but her hands shook too violently at the sight of Archer's wounds. Travis Brooks, the town's blacksmith, had volunteered to sit with him through the nights, but his heavy breathing and constant fidgeting only seemed to agitate the patient, so it fell to Willow. It always fell to Willow, but she'd been spinning flax the morning the war came to their doorstep. April 1862, when Captain Kai Sheridan's cavalry unit had thundered through town with news that Confederate forces were advancing on the railroad junction. The young men of Millbrook had barely finished kissing their sweethearts goodbye before they were marching east with nothing but hunting rifles and prayers. Archer had lingered longest at her gate. "Mind that will doesn't spin itself to pieces. While I'm gone," he'd said, his dark eyes already holding shadows of things he couldn't name. His calloused hand had brushed hers as he passed her the letter he'd been carrying in his coat pocket for 3 weeks. The one that asked her father's permission to court her proper-like. When he returned, she'd watched him disappear into the dust cloud of departing soldiers, his broad shoulders set with the kind of determination that either makes heroes or breaks men entirely. The letter remained unopened in her apron pocket, a talisman against the inevitable. Now those same shoulders barely filled out his nightshirt. The fever had burned away nearly 30 pounds, leaving him gaunt and hollow-eyed. But it was the silence that worried her most. Archer Navarro, who'd once filled every room with his booming laugh and stories that grew taller with each telling, hadn't spoken a coherent word since they'd brought him home. The spinning wheels. Rhythm faltered as exhaustion finally claimed her. Outside, the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the muslin curtains, painting the sick room in shades of pearl and shadow. Willow's head drooped toward her chest, but her foot kept working the treadle, muscle memory carrying her through the movements even as sleep tugged at her consciousness. "Willow." The voice was barely a whisper, rough as creek gravel. Her eyes snapped open. Archer was awake, really awake, for the first time since they'd brought him home. Those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. But there was something else in his gaze now, a brokenness that cut deeper than any physical wound. "You're here," he said, the words carrying a weight of wonder, as if he'd expected to wake up alone in whatever hell his fevered dreams had conjured. "I'm here." She set the wheel still, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the tin cup of water on the bedside table. "Have been for days. How do you feel?" He tried to shift in the bed, and she watched the exact moment reality crashed back into him. His eyes traveled down his body, taking inventory of what remained, what was gone forever. The sound that escaped him wasn't quite a gasp, wasn't quite a sob. It was something entirely new, the birth cry of a man being torn in half. "My legs." Not a question, a statement flat as a gravestone. Dr. Keller did everything he could. The infection gone. He closed his eyes, and she saw his jaw clench with the effort of containing whatever storm was building inside him. All of it gone. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the town waking up, Mrs. Holden calling to her chickens, the distant ring of Travis Brooks' hammer against his anvil, the everyday music of a world that had somehow continued spinning while theirs had stopped entirely. "The letter," Archer said suddenly, his voice barely audible. "The one I gave you. Did you?" "I haven't opened it." The confession slipped out before she could stop it, Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or resignation. Good. Burn it. Archer. What kind of man asks to court a woman when he can't even stand to greet her father? His laugh was bitter as winter wind. What kind of future is that, Willow? What kind of life? She wanted to tell him that love didn't measure itself in legs or the lack thereof, that her heart had claimed him long before any letter made it official, that she'd choose him broken over any other man whole. Instead, she simply resumed her spinning. The wheel's song filled the space between them, steady and sure as a heartbeat. And as the morning light grew stronger, painting the room in shades of gold and possibility, she made a choice that would change everything. But first, she needed to know what Amara Holden had whispered to Dr. Keller in the hallway yesterday. Words that had made the good doctor's face go pale as moonlight. Amara Holden's words echoed in Willow's mind as she descended the narrow staircase to the kitchen, the gangrene spreading faster than he's letting on. Another week, maybe two, and the rest had been lost in Dr. Keller's sharp intake of breath, but Willow had heard enough. She'd pressed herself against the wall outside Archer's room, her heart hammering against her ribs as the terrible truth settled over her like a shroud. The amputation hadn't been enough. Death was still stalking him, patient and relentless as a hungry wolf. Miss Green. Phoebe Dalton's voice startled her from her dark thoughts. The preacher's daughter stood in the kitchen doorway, her pale hands clutching a basket of fresh bread. I brought these for the patients. How is he this morning? Willow forced a smile she didn't feel. Awake. Talking some. Praise the Lord. Phoebe's relief was genuine, if naive. Perhaps he'll be strong enough for visitors soon. The whole town's been asking after him. The whole town. Willow almost laughed at the bitter irony. 3 months ago, Archer Navarro had been the most sought after. Bachelor in Millbrook, tall, strong, with a smile that could charm butter from a churn and hands that could coax music from any instrument. Now he was a curiosity, a cautionary tale whispered about in parlors and prayer circles. I'll ask Dr. Keller, she said, taking the bread with hands that trembled slightly. Though he needs his rest. Phoebe nodded, but her eyes lingered on Willow's face with uncomfortable intensity. You look peaked, dear. When's the last time you slept proper like? The question hung between them like an accusation. Willow couldn't remember the last time she'd slept anywhere but in the chair beside Archer's bed. Her father had tried to convince her to use her own room, but the nightmares came too fierce when she was alone. Visions of Archer calling her name while she was too far away to answer. I sleep enough, she lied. It's not natural, a young woman spending all her time nursing a man who isn't her husband. Phoebe's voice carried the weight of the town's collective judgment. People are starting to talk. Let them talk. The words came out sharper than intended. I don't recall asking for their opinions. Phoebe's eyes widened at the uncharacteristic venom in Willow's tone. I didn't mean to offend. It's just, well, Travis Brooks has been asking after you. He's a good man, steady work, and his feelings for you are plain as day. Maybe it's time to consider. Consider what? Willow's voice rose dangerously. Abandoning a dying man to pursue a convenient marriage? The word dying hung in the air, like a gunshot. Phoebe's face went white, and Willow realized she'd spoken the fear she'd been carrying like a stone in her chest. Dying, Phoebe whispered. But Dr. Keller said, Dr. Keller says many things. Willow turned away, busying herself with arranging the bread in a basket. Not all of them true. Before Phoebe could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Travis Brooks filled the doorway, his broad frame blocking the morning light. His blacksmith's apron was stained with soot, and his dark hair was damp with sweat from his early morning labors. Miss Green. He touched his cap respectfully, but his eyes held a possessive gleam that made Willow's skin crawl. Heard our boy was awake. Thought I might sit with him a spell, give you a rest. Our boy. As if Archer belonged to the town, as if his sacrifice had made him common property. Willow's hands clenched into fists at her sides. He's not ready for visitors, she said firmly. Now, Willow. Travis stepped closer, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that set her teeth on edge. You can't keep hovering over him like a mother hen. A man needs other men around him, especially when he's adjusting to his circumstances. His circumstances. The words came out like shards of ice. Is that what we're calling it now? Travis's face darkened. You know what I mean. He's going to need to learn to be practical about his future. And you. He reached out as if to touch her arm, but she stepped back. You need to be practical too. I've been patient, waiting for you to come to your senses, but this foolishness has gone on long enough. Foolishness. Willow's voice was deadly quiet now. Caring for a wounded soldier is foolishness. Wasting yourself on a cripple is foolishness. The words hit like a physical blow. Travis seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but pressed on anyway. I'm offering you a real future, Willow. A home, children, security. What can he offer you now? What kind of life is that? The same question Archer had asked her that morning, but coming from Travis's lips, it sounded obscene. Willow felt something cold and fierce rise in her chest, a protective fury that surprised her with its intensity. Get out. Her voice was calm, but her eyes blazed. Get out of my house. Now. Travis's face flushed red. You're making a mistake, Willow. When he's gone, and he will be gone soon, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that I offered you a chance at happiness. I said get out. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working as if he wanted to say more. Then he turned on his heel and stalked out, leaving the kitchen thick with tension and the smell of coal smoke. Phoebe stood frozen in the corner, her eyes wide with shock. Willow, perhaps he's right about, don't. Willow's voice was sharp as broken glass. Don't you dare. She pushed past Phoebe and climbed the stairs two at a time, her heart pounding with anger and something else, a desperate need to be near Archer, to assure herself that he was still breathing, still fighting. She found him propped up in bed, staring out the window at the morning sky. His face was pale but alert, and she wondered how much of the shouting downstairs he'd heard. Visitors? He asked without looking at her. No one important. She settled back into her chair, her hands automatically reaching for the spinning wheel. But as she began to work the treadle, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The bandages around his remaining leg were seeping fresh blood, and the smell, sweet and cloying, told her everything she needed to know about what Amara. Holden had whispered to Dr. Keller. Time was running out faster than anyone had imagined. The blood on the bandages wasn't from gangrene. Willow discovered this 2 hours later when Dr. Keller arrived for his evening rounds, his weathered face grim. With the weight of delivering daily doses of false hope, she watched him unwrap the soiled cloth with practiced efficiency, expecting to see the telltale black edges of creeping death. Instead, she saw something that made her heart skip. Healthy pink flesh, healing clean as a whistle. I don't understand. Dr. Keller's voice carried genuine confusion as he probed the wound site. The bleeding, it's not from infection. Archer's jaw tightened, and he turned his face toward the wall. Leave it be, document. Son, if you're reopening these wounds deliberately, I said leave it be. The silence that followed was deafening. Willow stared at Archer's profile, seeing the truth written in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the bedsheets with white-knuckled intensity. He'd been picking at the wounds, deliberately, trying to finish what the war had started. Dr. Keller's face went ashen. Son, you can't what? Archer's voice was hollow as a funeral bell. Can't choose my own ending? Can't spare everyone the trouble of watching me waste away? Archer. Willow's voice was barely a whisper. He finally looked at her, and she saw depths of pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with missing limbs. You want to know what I dream about, Willow? Not the battle, not the blood. I dream about dancing with you at the Harvest Festival. I dream about building you a house with my own 2 hands, carrying you over the threshold like a proper husband should. His voice cracked. I dream about things I'll never be able to give you. You think I care about dancing? The words burst out of her with surprising violence. You think I need you to carry me anywhere, don't you? He struggled to sit up straighter, his face flushed with fever and frustration. Don't you deserve a man who can stand beside you, not someone who'll be a burden for the rest of your life? A burden. She was on her feet now, her hands trembling with rage. Is that what you think this is? Charity? Pity? Dr. Keller cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should stay, Willow commanded without taking her eyes off Archer. He needs to hear this. She moved to the window, her back to both men as she struggled to find words for feelings she'd kept locked away for months. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the world in shades of gold and amber, and she could hear the distant sound of children playing in the street. the normal sounds of a world that had somehow continued spinning while theirs had stopped. Do you remember the day you left for war? She asked finally. You gave me that letter, but you said something else. Something you probably don't even remember. Archer's silence urged her to continue. You said, if something happens to me, don't you dare waste your life grieving. You made me promise to find happiness, to marry someone worthy of me. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Well, I kept that promise, Archer Navarro. I found someone worthy of me. I found you. Willow, I'm not finished. Her voice carried a steel he'd never heard before. You think losing your legs makes you less of a man? You think I fell in love with your ability to walk? I fell in love with the way you listened to my dreams like they mattered. The way you made me laugh until my sides ached. The way you looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. She moved closer to the bed, her voice dropping to a whisper. None of that required legs, Archer. None of that has changed. Dr. Keller had gone very still, his medical bag forgotten in his lap. Archer stared at Willow as if seeing her for the first time. But the letter, he said weakly. I asked to court you, not to burden you with, open it. The command startled them both. Willow reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the worn envelope, its edges soft from weeks of handling. She held it out to him with steady hands. If you're so determined to make decisions for both of us, then read what you wrote. Read it out loud. Archer's hands shook as he took the letter. The paper crackled as he opened it, and his eyes scanned the contents with growing confusion. He looked up at her, then back at the letter. I don't understand. Read it, she repeated. He cleared his throat, his voice uncertain. Dearest Willow, by the time you read this, I'll either be dead or wishing I were. But I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. If I don't come back, I want you to remember that you made me a better man just by believing I could be one. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway. Don't wait for me. Don't waste your youth on a ghost. Find someone who can give you the life you deserve, a house full of children, a husband who comes home to you every night, a future as bright as your smile. The letter fluttered to the floor as understanding dawned in his eyes. You never asked to court me, Willow said softly. You asked me to forget you. The room fell silent except for the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Dr. Keller rose quietly and moved toward the door, recognizing a moment too private for witnesses. The letter I gave you before I left, Archer said. Slowly, it was a goodbye. I knew the odds of coming back whole were slim. I wanted to set you free, and I wanted to stay bound. She knelt beside the bed, her hands covering his. Don't you see? I was never waiting for you to come back and claim me. I was waiting for you to come back and let me claim you. Something shifted in Archer's expression. A wall crumbling, a door opening after months of being barred shut. Even like this, he whispered. Especially like this. She brought his hand to her lips, pressing a gentle kiss to his knuckles. Because this proves what I've always known, you're worth fighting for. But even as hope began to bloom in his eyes, Willow heard the sound that would change everything. Horses' hooves thundering up the drive, accompanied by the unmistakable jingle of military spurs. Captain Kai Sheridan had returned to Millbrook, and the grim set of his jaw suggested he hadn't come bearing good news. Captain Kai Sheridan stood in the doorway like an angel of death, his uniform dust-covered and his face etched with the kind of weariness that comes from delivering terrible news too many times. Behind him, 3 soldiers waited on the porch, their rifles glinting in the afternoon sun. Ma'am. He touched his cap to Willow, then fixed his gaze on Archer. Sergeant Navarro. Captain. Archer's voice was steady, but Willow could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. Didn't expect to see you in Millbrook. Wish I was here for a social call. Sheridan stepped into the room, his spurs clicking against the floorboards. But I'm afraid I've got orders that can't wait. Dr. Keller emerged from the shadows where he'd been standing, his medical bag clutched protectively against his chest. Captain, this man is hardly in condition for military business. He needs rest, recovery time. Time's a luxury we don't have. Document. Sheridan's eyes never left Archer's face. Confederate forces are massing near the railroad junction. Intelligence suggests they're planning to cut off our supply lines within the week. Willow felt her blood turn to ice. What does that have to do with Archer? He's done his service. He's given enough. That's not for you to decide, Mississippi. Sheridan's tone was respectful but firm. Sergeant Navarro has knowledge of the Confederate positions around Shiloh Creek. Strategic intelligence that could save hundreds of lives. Knowledge he gained while getting his legs blown off. Willow shot back, her voice rising. You can't seriously expect. I expect every soldier to do his duty. Sheridan's voice cut through her protests like a blade. The war doesn't stop because a man gets wounded. It stops when we win. Archer had gone very still, his hands gripping the bedsheets. When he spoke, his voice was calm as deep water. What exactly are you asking me to do, Captain? We need you to guide a reconnaissance unit through the back trails around Shiloh Creek. You know those woods better than any man alive. The routes the rebels use, the places they're likely to make camp. Guide them how? The question came out flat. Emotionless, Sheridan's jaw tightened. We've got a wagon. You'd be transported to the area, positioned where you could observe and direct our movements. Positioned. Archer's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Like a piece of artillery. Point me in the right direction and let me do damage. Archer, you don't have to, Willow began, but he held up a hand to silence her. And if I refuse? He asked. Sheridan's expression didn't change. Then good men will die because they went into those woods blind. Men with wives and children waiting for them. Men who still have their whole lives ahead of them. The words hit like physical blows. Willow saw Archer flinch, saw the guilt settle over his features like a shroud. This was what Sheridan had come to do. Not just to request Archer's help, but to make him feel responsible for whatever happened without it. You bastard, she whispered. Willow. Archer's voice was sharp with warning. No. She turned to face Sheridan, her eyes blazing with fury. You come into my home, into his sick room, and you try to guilt a wounded man into risking his life again? For what? So you can look good in your reports to headquarters? Miss Green, Dr. Keller interjected. Nervously, perhaps we should. I know what you're doing, she continued, ignoring the doctor's attempts to calm her. You're using his conscience against him, his sense of duty. But hasn't he given enough? Hasn't he paid enough? Sheridan's face remained impassive. The war asks what it asks, Mississippi. We don't get to choose the price. The war. She spat the words. Like a curse. The war has already taken his legs, his future, nearly his life. What more do you want from him? I want him to help us end this thing. For the first time, Sheridan's composure cracked slightly. I want him to use what he knows to save lives instead of lying here feeling sorry for himself. The silence that followed was deafening. Willow could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the fierce sweat on Dr. Keller's brow, could feel the weight of Archer's decision pressing down on all of them like a physical force. I'll do it. The words were so quiet, she almost missed them. But when she turned to look at Archer, she saw the resolution in his eyes, the familiar set of his jaw that she'd seen the morning he'd marched away to war. No. The word tore from her throat. Archer, no. I have to. He reached for her hand, his fingers surprisingly strong. You said I was worth fighting for. Well, maybe this is how I fight. Maybe this is how I earn the right to come home to you. You don't have to earn anything. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and bitter. You've already earned everything. You've already given everything. Not everything. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. I haven't given you a future worth having, but maybe I can give you a world worth living in. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat drops of rain began to spatter against the windows. The storm that had been building all day was finally breaking, and Willow felt as if the sky was weeping for all of them. When Archer asked Sheridan, Dawn, my men will help you to the wagon. Make sure you're comfortable for the journey. Comfortable. Archer's smile was grim. That's a kind word for it. Sheridan nodded stiffly. We'll be back at first light. Use the time to make your preparations. He turned and walked out without another word, his soldiers following like shadows. The sound of their horses' hooves faded into the growing storm, leaving the room heavy with the weight of what tomorrow would bring. Willow sank into her chair, her hands shaking as she reached for the spinning wheel. But for the first time in days, she couldn't make her fingers work the fiber. The thread kept breaking, snapping under the pressure of her trembling touch. Willow. Archer's voice was gentle, but she couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the resolution in his eyes, the acceptance of what felt like another death sentence. I won't let you go, she whispered. I won't let them take you away from me again. But even as she spoke the words, she knew she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The war had already taken so much from them. Tomorrow, it would demand the rest. The spinning wheel fell silent, and outside, the storm raged on. Dawn came too soon, gray and reluctant through the rain-washed windows. Willow had not slept. She'd spent the night beside Archer's bed, her hands working frantically at the spinning wheel, creating thread after thread of the finest flax, enough to weave a shirt, a blanket, a lifetime of tomorrows that might never come. The rhythmic motion had become a prayer, a desperate bargain with whatever gods might be listening. Keep him safe. Bring him home. Let this not be the end. You don't have to watch, Archer said quietly as the sound of wagon wheels echoed up the drive. She looked at him then, really looked. Someone, Dr. Keller, probably, had helped him wash and shave during the night. His dark hair was combed back from his forehead, and he wore his cleanest shirt. He looked almost like the man who'd left for war, except for the careful way he held himself, the way his eyes had learned to avoid looking at where his legs should have been. Yes, I do. She set the spinning wheel aside and moved to the window. Captain Sheridan was climbing down from the wagon, his face grim in the morning light. Behind him, 2 soldiers waited with a stretcher. I have to see you go. I have to be able to picture you coming back. Willow, no. She turned from the window, her jaw set with the same determination that had kept her spinning through the long nights. No goodbyes. Not this time. The sound of boots on the stairs made them both fall silent. Dr. Keller appeared in the doorway, his medical bag in one hand and a small brown bottle in the other. Laudanum, he explained, setting the bottle on the bedside table. For the pain. During transport. And this. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Instructions for field dressing if the wounds reopen. They won't, Archer said firmly. I'm done with that. Willow felt a flicker of hope at the certainty in his voice. Whatever had shifted between them yesterday, whatever wall had crumbled, it had changed him. The man who'd been trying to hasten his own death was gone, replaced by someone who intended to fight for the future they'd finally admitted they wanted. Captain Sheridan appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the small room like a storm cloud. Time to go, Sergeant. Archer nodded, then looked at Willow. There's something I need to give you before I go. He reached under his pillow and pulled out a small wooden object, a spool, carved with intricate designs of roses and thorns. The workmanship was exquisite, clearly the product of many careful hours. I made this for you, he said, pressing it into her hands. While you were sleeping. Well, the few minutes when you were sleeping. She turned the spool over in her hands, marveling at the delicate craftsmanship. Even with his wounds, even with everything he'd lost, he'd found a way to create something beautiful for her. The roses are for hope, he explained. The thorns are for the hard times we'll face. But look here. He guided her finger to a spot where the thorns gave way to smooth wood. Even the sharpest pain doesn't last forever. Archer, her voice was thick with tears. Use it for your spinning. And when you do, remember that I'm coming back to you. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because you're worth choosing every day for the rest of my life. The soldiers entered then, their faces respectfully averted as they positioned the stretcher beside the bed. Willow watched them lift Archer with practiced efficiency, saw him bite back a gasp of pain as his weight shifted. But he didn't cry out. He met her eyes and smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him since he'd come home. Keep that wool spinning, he said as they carried him toward the door. I'll be listening for it. And then he was gone, leaving only the scent of laudanum and the echo of wagon wheels disappearing into the morning mist. Willow stood frozen in the empty room for a long moment, the wooden spool clutched against her chest. Then, slowly, she moved to the spinning wheel and fitted the new spool into place. The thread that emerged was different somehow, stronger, more resilient, as if Archer's love had been woven into the very wood point. 3 days later, the sound of approaching horses sent Willow flying to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. But it wasn't the military wagon she'd been dreading to see return. It was Travis Brooks, accompanied by Phoebe Dalton and half the town council. Miss Green, Travis called from the yard. We need to talk. She met them at the front door, her chin raised defiantly. If you're here to tell me I was wrong to let him go, save your breath. Actually, Phoebe stepped forward, her face bright with excitement. We're here to tell you that you were right. Right? The mission was a success, Travis said, and for the first time in months, his voice held genuine warmth. They intercepted the Confederate supply train, captured 3 rebel officers, and gathered intelligence that could end the war in this region within weeks. And Archer, wounded but alive, Phoebe rushed to explain. Captain Sheridan said he showed more courage than any soldier he'd ever served with. They're bringing him home this afternoon. Willow felt her knees give out. She sank into a chair, overwhelmed by relief so profound it left her breathless. He's really coming home? There's more, Travis said awkwardly. The whole town, we owe you an apology. We were wrong about him. About you. About what love really means. Before Willow could respond, she heard it, the familiar sound of wagon wheels on the drive. But this time, the sound was accompanied by something else. Archer's voice, raised in song, carrying across the afternoon air like a benediction. She ran to the window and saw him sitting upright in the wagon bed, his face turned toward the sun, singing an old hymn about coming home. Captain Sheridan was grinning beside him, and even the soldiers looked lighter somehow, as if Archer's joy was contagious. He's singing, she whispered. He's been singing for miles, Sheridan called out as the wagon stopped. Says he's got a woman waiting for him who promised to keep a wheel spinning until he got back. Willow didn't remember running down the stairs or out the front door. She only remembered the moment when Archer's arms closed around her, strong and sure, and the way he whispered her name like a prayer answered. I heard it, he said against her hair. Even in the woods, even when the bullets were flying, I could hear your spinning wheel. It called me home. Later, as the town celebrated around them and the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Willow sat beside Archer on the front porch. Her spinning wheel sang its ancient song, and new thread, strong and true, spooled steadily in the fading light. So, Archer said, his hand covering hers on the wheel. About that letter I never wrote, the one where I asked your father for permission to court you proper like. What about it? I was thinking I might write it after all, if you'd have me. She looked at him, this man who'd lost so much and found a way to hope anyway, and smiled. I'd have you any way you came to me, broken or whole, walking or not, in sickness and in health. Is that a yes? That's a yes. As if in response to their words, the spinning wheel's song grew sweeter, stronger, weaving their love into something that would last far beyond the war, far beyond the wounds, far beyond anything the world could throw at them. In the distance, church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to evening prayer. But Willow and Archer stayed where they were, listening to the music of the spinning wheel and the sound of each other's voices, planning a future that would bloom like roses after the longest winter either of them had ever known. If this story of love conquering all odds touched your heart, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales of courage, devotion, and the power of the human spirit to triumph over any trial. And don't forget to comment below and let us know where you're watching from today. Your support means the world to us.